The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The fallout and the revisionist history as a result of this simple question that Megyn Kelly asked would-be likely presidential candidate Jeb Bush on her program on Fox News, would you go into Iraq, was going into Iraq a mistake, is really escalating in a way that is both disturbing and just really hard to believe, where now we are hearing from multiple people this idea that Jeb Bush started, that somehow George W. Bush was misled into war in Iraq, as if he is somehow the victim of faulty intelligence. I was kind of surprised initially that there still wasn't any serious condemnation of the entire Iraq invasion by Republicans, but okay, maybe that was a little bit too much to expect. But then yesterday I told you about Marco Rubio, who said, he said a whole bunch of stuff to Chris Wallace on Fox News, but one of the things he ultimately said was that it was not a mistake to go into Iraq, and that the Bush administration simply made the right decision based on the intelligence they had, which we later found out to be faulty. This is such an irresponsible revisionist history. As we know, Lewis, the Bush administration used faulty intelligence to build a case for war, portraying George W. Bush now as the sort of victim of he always just was following the intelligence he had. No, we know, as the Washington Post has said, the White House directed the CIA to start creating an intelligence case for going into Iraq. They demanded that the intelligence be crafted. They weren't the victims of it.
No, but if you are doing the media tour here like Jeb, this is the perfect answer, is it not?
Yeah,
it
no,
really
in a way it is.
Go ahead.
And David Korn from Mother Jones put together a bunch of really good data points on this. August of 2002, Cheney gives a speech where he says, simply stated, there's no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. However, the military intelligence at the time did not say that. It said Iraq maybe had residual amounts of weapons of mass destruction, with nothing actually confirming that there is a revived or active WMD operation. Go to September of 2002. Dick Cheney insisting there is, quote, very clear evidence that Saddam Hussein was developing nuclear weapons. But Cheney and the Bush White House didn't mention to the public that the intelligence community behind the scenes was in an uproar, in a huge dispute with each other, because they did not know that that was the case. And they concluded, in fact, as the conversations went on, that the claims that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney were making were not true. And then remember when Dick Cheney referred to this report, which maintained that 9/11 ringleader Mohammed Atta met in Prague with an Iraqi intelligence officer, but that was also a claim dismissed by the CIA and FBI. So when you look back at it, Lewis, and Bush also said Saddam has been dealing with al-Qaeda. When you look back, Bush and Cheney were demanding that the intelligence toe this line, and they were not at all the victims of faulty intelligence who just made the right decision.
Now, to what extent can we point the finger at the CIA and other intelligence gatherers, who might have had their own kind of a plan here and may perhaps fabricated or exaggerated intelligence?
All the evidence we have, remember, based on those reports from the Washington Post, the White House called members of the CIA and said, we want you to create a document which could be used to convince the American public that there is a threat from Iraq. The CIA, we could say, is guilty because they went along with it. We could talk about the relationship between the CIA and the White House and how independent the CIA truly is. We could talk about all those things. But what is abundantly clear is that the Bush administration dictated that this intelligence be presented, not that they were bystanders reacting to intelligence that had been brought to them willy-nilly.
But leave it to Jeb Bush to try and change history now and make his brother look like a victim.
It's intellectually dishonest. These guys are liars. The George W. Bush administration is the furthest thing from a victim when it comes to the Iraq War. It is such a perversion of history to suggest that. There is no crime in the U.S. that fascinates corporate media as much as terrorism, provided it's the right sort of terrorism. Remember that. It has to be corporate media approved terrorism, motivated by some fanatic strain of Islam, or terrorists motivated by some kind of other compelling and titillating narrative. But if you're just a Christian domestic terrorist, that's not that interesting to corporate media. And we now have the story, which you may not have heard if you've been paying attention to corporate media, of former congressional candidate and ordained Christian minister Robert Doggart from Signal Mountain, Tennessee. He was caught on tape and on social media talking about wiping out a Muslim community in upstate New York. He reached a plea agreement in U.S. District Court in the Eastern District of Tennessee. He told an FBI informant he was planning on to attack the residents of a Muslim community known as Islamburg near Hancock, New York. There's a recorded call where Doggart says, quote, "Those guys have to be killed. Their buildings need to be burnt down. If we can get in there and do that, not losing a man, even the better." The buildings that Doggart planned to destroy included a mosque, a school, and a cafeteria. He elaborated in another conversation. "When we meet in this state, the people we seek will know who we are. We will be cruel to them and we will burn down their buildings. And if anyone attempts to harm us in any way, our standoff gunner will take them down from 350 yards away. The standoff gunner will be me." He also actually recruited gunners. He tested his M4 rifle to see if it would be good in the scenario he was imagining. This is a guy who was moving along with these plans, Lewis. It wasn't just some harebrained idea disconnected from reality. This guy was moving forward.
Sounds like it. It sounds like he had it all figured out. And just the way he was describing what he wanted to do, it sounded like something from some medieval movie, didn't it?
It really does. And he was able to only plead guilty to interstate communication of threats, even though he was clearly engaged in potentially terroristic activity here, faces a maximum of 5 years in jail, and very little coverage. Some local reports, the Chattanoogan covered it, the Chattanooga Times. The only real coverage of this is from progressive blogs wondering, where the hell is the national coverage on this? If it were Muslim would-be perpetrators doing the exact same thing, you know what the corporate news cycle would be doing with this, Lewis.
I do. So this, I guess this just isn't that interesting. Maybe if you were caught with a bomb, do you think it would have received a bit more coverage?
Remember the Georgia guys caught with the bombs, the pipe bombs, and one other type of bomb? Barely anything. There was a blip on the radar in local Georgia and Southeast media, but otherwise, corporate media barely cares.
Well, there were multiple militias with that type of intent and equipment. So, I guess that's just it. I suppose if you're just a white guy, it's not that interesting.
We often talk about structural racism and systemic racism and mechanisms in our society that disproportionately impact minorities. But every once in a while, we have just flat out good old-fashioned retrograde racism. At 11:38 Monday morning, 2 days ago, President Barack Obama sent his first tweet from his new Twitter account. He said, quote, "Hello, Twitter. It's Barack. Really? 6 years in, they're finally giving me my own account." 10 minutes later, as David Badash over at the New Civil Rights Movement tells us, there were all sorts of tweets calling President Obama a nigger. David Badash highlights a lot of these tweets. Doxful the God tweeted to the president, "Get cancer, nigger." John J. Johnson, MN. "What do you call the first black president of the United States? Nigger." Nico tweeting to President Obama, "Please stop being a nigger, it's bad." And people who want to protect gun rights, including one person who goes by the name Protect Gun Rights on Twitter. "So will the person that called you a nigger be charged with a hate crime like when gays are called faggots?" Remember, Lewis, the liberals are silencing the right, which has no racism in it.
This is really not surprising at all. You can usually find this stuff on social media every day referring to the president. But I guess now that he is taking to the internet himself, it requires a little extra oomph.
What do you think it's like? Do you think Obama's really on his phone and he sees, oh, they're calling me the N-word, and has a conversation with somebody in the Oval Office? Do you think that he's barely really tweeting here, that he just dictates a tweet to someone? Like, what do you imagine the scene is when the N-word tweets just start pouring in?
I'd like to think that he's having fun with this and paying attention to Twitter and maybe attempting some type of interaction with the people that are following him. But, if I had to guess, I'd say that he's probably not paying much attention to this. And, he knows what people are saying about him either way.
How will the right react to the right being incredibly racist on Twitter? They'll say, oh, it's Obama's own damn fault, right? If he wasn't such an uppity black guy, then the God-fearing patriotic Americans wouldn't feel compelled to lash out at him on Twitter. It's all Obama's fault. You know that, Lewis, by now.
He's the reason that my milk was spoiled this morning. I think a lot of the people will also say that, these people do not represent the right. These people don't represent, et cetera, et cetera.
Senator Bernie Sanders, who is running for president, has officially introduced a bill that would eliminate undergraduate tuition. It's called the College for All Act. It would eliminate the $70 billion tuition costs at all four-year public colleges and universities. Under the plan, the federal government would cover 2/3 of the costs. The states would cover 1/3 of the costs. The bill plans to cover the costs by creating what they are calling a Robin Hood tax on Wall Street. It's a 0.5% speculation fee. It would be charged on investment houses, hedge funds, other stock trades, and there would be a 0.1% fee charged on bonds, and then a 0.005% fee charged on derivatives. I love the plan, Lewis. This is fantastic. It is economically stimulative to increase the number of people who have access to and can afford a college degree. Brilliant. Terrible idea to call this a Robin Hood tax. Robin Hood was known for robbing from the rich and giving it to the poor. If we're trying to fight this insane narrative set by the right of taxes or theft, unfair income redistribution, don't call it the Robin Hood tax.
Well, it depends on how you look at this. So just by default, are the rich going to be paying more for this bill for free college tuition for all? Yes, but it also applies to them, doesn't it?
Yes, it does also apply to them. And I get that that Robin Hood arguably was stealing money that may have been stolen by the rich to begin with. But I understand what you're saying, Lewis, but it's feeding into the narrative.
It is, but I don't think you can help that, because that's just the mentality that many people have. I mean, that's their idea of what's happening here, even with regular taxes. So how do you change that?
Let's also remember that Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, the entire Republican clown car announces their candidacies. They go on tour. Bernie Sanders is running for president. He is still in Washington doing his job, using his private time to campaign. Say whatever you like about him. He is doing legislative business and running the campaign. Quite admirable.
He's doing a great job, and especially for a guy his age. He seems to have no lack of energy.
Tell me if I'm wrong on any of this. Twitter.com/dpacman and join us on Reddit. DavidPacman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. Back after this. Great show today.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPacman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
You can support our program if you ever shop on Amazon.com by shopping after clicking on the Amazon banner on our website, davidpacman.com. I recommend bookmarking the link and using it whenever you shop. You can, of course, support us by being a David Pakman Show member. Go to davidpacman.com/membership to sign up. Richard Greenwood is today's new member of the day. One of the great member benefits is every 3 months or so, Lewis and I host a video conference. We call it a David Pakman Show Town Hall with all of our members, where any member who wants to can participate, ask questions with a webcam or with a microphone or even text questions, and Lewis and I will answer them. We have one of those town halls scheduled for tonight. I predict, Lewis, a lot of questions tonight about the upcoming changes with the show.
I hope so. I would have fun answering those questions, or trying to. I think there's still, some unanswered questions.
Yeah, we'll answer whatever we can, obviously.
Yeah. But I'm looking forward to it.
DavidPakman.com/membership. Participation in the town halls. Only one of any number of compelling member benefits. It's time for Hatriot Mail with another new Hatriot Mail introduction.
It's like email forwards from your racist grandma on steroids. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Very nice. Quick note on Hatriot Mail, the upcoming Indiegogo fundraiser. We already have a lot of Hatriot Mail related premiums. The Hatriot Mail narrator has agreed to record in Hatriot Mail voice outgoing voicemail messages for you. So when someone calls you, if you don't pick up, you can have Hatriot Mail guy record your message. I predict that one will sell out. We also have Hatriot Mail 70s style movie posters, which are going to be available in the fundraiser. So much great stuff. Let me not delay any further. I want to get into this week's Hatriot Mail. It is quite crazy, I must say.
No, David and the other guy, you got this wrong. Face palms. You cannon let your wicked, inhumane thoughts go unchallenged, because when will they stop? One day a bully comes up to you and takes your sweets. Next day he comes up, takes your money. If the Pakman Show is guiding you, some things are just not acceptable to the human race. Simple as that. Doing this cartoon thing is no different from baiting pesos online. You're tempting wickedness to show itself, and guess what? In the case of pedophiles and Muslims, it always works. They cannot control themselves. Sorry, I should say religious people, not Muslims per se. They are all as bad as each other. You see the point, David?
I have to tell you, Lewis, I don't really see the point. What are pesos? Maybe they mean pedos, right? Because then they talk about pedophiles after.
That could be it, yeah. I think there is one thing we can agree with, though, and that's religious people are all as bad as each other. So there's something I can relate to there.
Yeah, we've never said that extremists in one religion are worse than extremists in other religion. We've pointed out that extremists in some religions tend to get a lot more coverage than extremists in other religions by corporate media. I think this entire thing was related to the Muhammad cartoon contest. Very, very interesting stuff. I think if in the future linguists and anthropologists and sociologists come across Hatriot Mail, it will bring up a lot of questions about society at this time, and that would be very, very interesting. Corruption alert. Harold Hamm, who is the Billionaire founder and CEO of Continental Resources, told a University of Oklahoma dean that he wanted the dean to fire scientists who were researching the links between oil and gas activity, which Hamm's company is involved in, and Oklahoma's earthquake surge. According to Bloomberg's Benjamin Elgin, quote, Mr. Hamm is very upset at some of the earthquake reporting, to the point that he would like to see select OGS staff dismissed, wrote Larry Grillo, the dean of the university's Mewbourne College of Earth and Energy, in an email to colleagues at the university. So there was an Open Records Act filing made, and they got all sorts of records about how Harold Hamm wanted all of these scientists doing research into the very disturbing increase of earthquakes around oil and gas activity. He wanted them fired because that really wasn't going to be good for business. So that you know, it's not so corrupt that the university fired the scientists that Hamm wanted fired, but now we know that this is something that he was asking for. The Bloomberg story also had a few other emails and a few other conversations. It is very, very interesting to take a look at. Continental Resources was asked to comment about the firing request. They did not, Lewis. And as a public institution, this is exactly what the university should be researching. Let's explore what are we doing to our environment? What are we doing to our planet? And we see private corporation come in and say, this is not good for business. Fire these people immediately. It's the height of grandiosity. And it's probably not out of line in the sense that we know the Koch brothers endow department chairs at universities. You think they're going to do things that are not beneficial to the Koch business? Of course not. I guess we should be glad that at least Hamm's request was ignored.
Agreed. It's incredible to me that how to phrase this. It's incredible to me that this man, a billionaire, seems to be completely obsessed with making billions and billions of more dollars. It seems to just be a game. I mean, when is enough enough?
Right, he wants to hoard money, right? As Tom Hartman is talking about. It's hoarding the way somebody might have 55 cats, or, Lewis used to have 700 video games or whatever. They're hoarding money, but the marginal benefit, in the same way that when a hoarder has 50 cats, the 51st cat does nothing for them. There's no marginal benefit from that 51st cat. If you've got $2 billion, the marginal benefit from another $1 million is essentially zero.
And so to me, what do I think? I think maybe this guy just wants to watch the world burn. How is he explaining these earthquakes that came out of nowhere?
Huh?
I really don't know. I'm very confused.
The real problem, though, is that public institutions get their budgets cut to the bone decade after decade, and then they rely on private and outside funding, and that takes away their independence because they may well be in a financial position where they have to say, oh, you know what? We would have to shut the entire thing down if we lose the money that we get from this person or that company. We'd better just do what they say.
So maybe we blame Congress for that. I'm not really sure.
Hey, you can always go back to how things are financed if you really want to address where the issues are stemming from. Hey, this is an absurd story. 2 women say that they were forced to receive trans-vaginal probes by their college instructors as part of their training on the medical procedure. These are students suing Valencia College and 3 medical diagnostic instructors, Maureen Bugnacki, Linda Shaheen, and Barbara Ball, in federal court, saying they were forced to undergo transvaginal ultrasounds weekly or face retaliation. Valencia College is a public state college in Orlando, Florida, probably not too far from where Lewis went to Full Sail Academy. The lawsuit claims that college staff members told the students, quote, they can find another school if they don't wish to be probed. During the transvaginal probing, it is reported, it has been alleged that the teachers were talking about how attractive some of the students were and making all sorts of sexually suggestive noises. A second-year student, nicknamed the Trans-Vag Queen, Lewis, explained to the women during the orientation that the sonography program believed students should undergo invasive ultrasound procedures to become better technicians. They were required to take their clothes off in a bathroom, cover themselves with towels, and cross the classroom in front of other students. What do you think about this, Lewis?
It sounds illegal. It sounds outrageous. And I can't believe that they actually agreed to do it.
That's the thing I said. Wouldn't you think after the first time you say, I'm going to call a lawyer and the police?
Yeah, after just being told that this was mandatory, I think I would get the authorities involved.
From the court filings, quote, a student would place a condom over the transvaginal probe and then apply generous amounts of lubrication to the probe. In some cases, the student would have to sexually stimulate plaintiffs in order to facilitate the insertion of the probe into plaintiffs' vaginas. The college issued a statement saying the use of volunteers for medical sonography training is a nationally accepted practice. They're almost trying to suggest, hey, this is what we do. You get not only probed, but also sexually harassed in any legitimate sonography program across the country. This is just the accepted way of training students on this.
This is crazy. It's not that I think that someone who is seeking to do this, undergo one of these ultrasounds, like maybe that is a good idea, but you have to give them the option. You cannot tell them that this is mandatory and that we will kick you out if you don't undergo it.
But it also sounds like it was made into like a weird sexual thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another layer here that I think is worth scrutinizing.
If only we had a word for when people are forced to allow others to penetrate them vaginally. If there was just some word in society, in the English language, that described forced vaginal penetration, I don't know.
Just
I can't
make
think
sure
of one.
whatever word you use is legitimate.
Yeah, so it has to be a legitimate and honest word, because otherwise it has no credibility whatsoever. Horrible, horrible story at Valencia College. I got a lot of emails from Florida residents saying, David, as soon as I read the headline, I started saying, please don't let it be Florida. And it was indeed Florida.
Well, yes, we get many crazy and outrageous stories from Florida. Why? We can't answer that.
This particular one doesn't start with Florida man, though. This one does involve 3 female teachers. That's something, I guess, that differentiates it from most of the Florida stories. Next, stand your ground. Do the stand your ground laws make sense? Are they racially tinged? Robert Spitzer will tell us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Robert Spitzer, who is a distinguished service professor of political science at SUNY Cortland. Recently wrote an op-ed in the New York Times titled "Stand Your Ground Makes No Sense," which is based on his book, Guns Across America. This was really interesting to read, and I want you to kind of walk us through the logic of the case you lay out here. First of all, with regard to the impact of Stand Your Ground on investigations, police investigations, and sort of the general course of figuring out what happened when deadly force was used, what's the impact of these laws on investigations?
Well, that's a very important part of this puzzle. Let me begin by saying that stand your ground laws per se are not brand new. They've actually existed in some states in America going back to the late 19th century. And some states adapted to that without any difficulty, but something very important happened in 2005, which was that the state of Florida enacted a beefed up state stand your ground law, stand your ground law on steroids, if you want, where it really changed the legal equation with respect to the ability of police and prosecutors to conduct thorough and proper criminal investigations when another person, especially when another person had been killed. And this is the major change in the law that has prompted much concern and that I write about in my op-ed and also in my recent book. So what various studies have demonstrated is that since the enactment of this heightened stand your ground law, first in Florida and then in about half of the states around the country, that based on various studies, they demonstrate that in the state of Florida, for example, where this law has been most thoroughly in place, that it has made it very, very difficult for prosecutors to examine cases, to bring charges, very difficult for police to investigate. And the reason why is because the person who commits the killing, who then claims, look, I was in fear for my life, that simple claim brings the normal criminal justice process to a halt. And as a result, the ability of police and prosecutors to investigate as they normally would when a person is dead at the hands of another person is severely hamstrung. And so the ability to even gather information initially is hobbled. It is still possible in Florida and some other states to bring cases. Cases have been brought, but it's more difficult to do it and more difficult to win verdicts that would seem to be appropriate under most circumstances. And that is a great concern. In the state of Florida, studies have shown that, in fact, those who benefit most from the Stand Your Ground law are people who have felony backgrounds already. These are the largest percentage of people who are making Stand Your Ground claims. And they're people who are drug dealers, who have committed other felonies in the past. And, of course, they're latching on to this Stand Your Ground law because, in many instances, they're able to simply get off by nothing more than saying, look, I believed my life was in danger.
And let's also talk a little bit about the circumstances of when the Stand Your Ground claims are made. You write that Stand Your Ground claims have succeeded 67% of the time, roughly 2/3 of the time, but that in 79% of the cases, the assailant could have actually retreated to avoid the confrontation altogether, and that in 68% of the cases, the person killed actually was unarmed. So talk a little bit about how stand your ground sort of flips self-defense, where normally you have a duty to retreat if you are able before applying that deadly force, and how that's completely turned upside down by such doctrine.
That's a very important point. The statistics that you quoted are from studies specifically in the state of Florida, although there are studies involving other states that have come to similar conclusions. But in sort of changing the equation, it's important to note by way of background that, as I said, some states have stand your ground laws, but other states have another legal tradition, which is that if you are in a situation in a public place where you're facing the prospect of a confrontation with another person, the legal obligation is to retreat from the circumstance if you can do so safely. That second part is very important. Obviously, if you're endangering yourself by trying to retreat, that's a different matter. So safe retreat is in fact, what Florida law said up until 2005, and it's the law in many other states of the Union. But in these circumstances, just as you quoted them, investigations subsequently showed that these violent confrontations to a great degree could have been avoided entirely by safe retreat, and that was revealed through a newspaper investigation. And so the net result is that we have more violence and more fatalities because of this law than we did before. Now, one other point, if you look at that total number of fatalities and roll them into aggregate crime statistics, you're not going to see a big percentage jump. But there's no question that hundreds of people over the last 10 years or so have died in stand your ground type confrontations where that simply did not have to occur.
And what have we seen if we look at whether it's the Wall Street Journal study or Texas A&M University or any of the studies that have been done? What can we say about in states that have stand your ground laws since they've enacted them on in terms of the change in the number of homicides that we've seen, and also the change in the number of crimes that you may be able to prevent by owning a gun?
Yes, these studies, these are studies of nationwide trends comparing those states that adopted these heightened stand your ground laws with those that did not. And they observed a couple of studies, very comparable numbers, roughly a 6 to 8% increase in such violent confrontation. So it was a measurable number. And that led the researchers of various studies to conclude that, in fact, these heightened stand your ground laws make violence more likely. And there is, of course, a counter argument, which is that, people have a right to defend themselves, which they certainly do. And many Americans in recent years have gone out and obtained pistol permits, concealed carry permits, so that they could carry a concealed firearm in case they confronted a dangerous situation. And, there's a certain logic to that, but the big question is, what effect has that had? And statistically speaking, there is literally no evidence, there's literally no credible evidence that more gun carrying by civilians has helped with respect to violent confrontations. Rather, it's the reverse. In point of fact, if you've been following in the news in recent days about the biker gangs in Waco, Texas, where mass arrests occurred and over 160 bikers have been arrested, and there was a shootout where 9 people were killed, it turns out that those bikers, many of those bikers, at least from preliminary police information, had concealed carry permits, and they are encouraged to get these permits, to get these guns, precisely so that they can be armed and ready to confront opposing biker gangs. So it seems to be a pretty clear example of the problem with weapons carrying, with who carries weapons, and the outcome.
And Robert, we don't have too much time left, but I think one of the most important things to talk about is the racially tinged impact of stand your ground laws. We talk about structural and systemic racism when it comes to the prosecution of drug laws in this country and so many other areas. We also need to be considering that when it comes to stand your ground claims, do we not?
Yes, we do. And here again, there is a study that examines stand your ground versus non-stand your ground states with respect to how many instances of self-defense have been claimed where someone was killed, and how that breaks down by race. And what the study showed was that when you examine it by race, if you are an African American who kills a white, the likelihood of prosecution is many, many, many times greater than if you are a white who kills an African American, or a white who kills a white, or an African American who kills an African American. This is a correlation study. It doesn't absolutely prove that race is the only factor at play, but it provides pretty strong evidence that the race-based, race-biased nature of our, of elements at least of our criminal justice system do affect the extent to which stand your ground claims are prosecuted and result in convictions. And indeed, they're far, far more likely to result in prosecutions and convictions when the perpetrator is African American and the victim is white. So race does seem to be a factor in the administration of stand your ground type cases, and it's a matter of concern.
People are going to hear a conversation and they're going to think we're talking about taking guns away from people, gun grabbing, impacting the Second Amendment. But the reality is that stand your ground laws have nothing to do at all with who can own guns or which guns can be owned. This is merely a legal matter with regard to the use of guns in particular situations.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a very important point. And I will add, I have a concealed carry pistol permit myself, and I write about that process in my book. So, I'm well acquainted with that process. But indeed, the whole concern is that when a person is killed in a violent confrontation with another person, maybe it's justified, maybe it's not, but you must have, it is very important to have a proper criminal investigation to make sure the claim is legitimate. And these stand your ground on steroids laws make that proper investigation very, very, very difficult. And that undermines people's confidence in the criminal justice system. And that is a big concern. And it should be a concern for any and every lawful gun owner in America as well.
We've been speaking with Professor Robert Spitzer. The book is Guns Across America. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good to speak with you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Another anti-gay pastor has been caught trolling for sex with men online. Up until 2 p.m. on Monday, the Our Church Staff section of St. John's Lutheran Church and School's website talked about Reverend Matthew Michaela as an associate pastor who liked family, music, home improvement, gardening, landscaping, and sports. However, the website Queerty obtained screenshots from a source who asked that his name be withheld, that there was an online profile of Reverend Michaela where he talks about liking nude makeout sessions and sex with other men. In November of 2014, a fellow Midland man of God, Pastor Dan Dickerson, wrote an op-ed called A Stand for the Truth, which said in part, quote, "A sexual attraction to the same sex is a sinful temptation to be resisted and overcome by God's grace and power, just as a temptation to steal or lie or overeat must be resisted and overcome by replacement with working hard, telling the truth, and moderation in appetite." So Pastor Michaela shows up and starts commenting online and says, "Thank you, Pastor Dickerson, for believing the word of God and loving people enough to reveal God's will for their lives and his plan for salvation for all believe in Jesus. I love people who have same-sex attraction, and so does God. The proof is in the sacrifice he made for all of us who sin. We don't tell a person born with tendencies to abuse alcohol to keep on giving in to his innate desires because he can't help it. We try to help him in his struggle." Then he also posted to his Facebook page a long rant about how natural marriage didn't always reflect God's will of love and submission, that there were always perversions of marriage. Those included divorce and more recently they include gay marriage. Meanwhile, behind the scenes on his smartphone, sending messages to men saying he likes making out naked with men, he likes oral sex with men, he's a top, he likes to cuddle with men, and he's very interested, Lewis, in being with a bi-curious guy as well. He has confirmed the authenticity of these screen captures, but he is not commenting. He also has resigned from his position at the church. The church has removed him from the website. You know, quite frankly, I don't care that this guy is gay. What I do care about is the fact that he has likely ruined the lives of many LGBT people, maybe even young LGBT people within his congregation. And meanwhile, he himself is a gay man. And we've seen it time and time again. 10, 12, 15, 25 at this point of these anti-gay pastors and politicians who are actually gay themselves.
And after all of those stories, we still have another guy here who thinks that he's going to get away with it, putting pictures through, through those internet tubes. Why can't you just use old school techniques like waving your hand under a bathroom stall, like Larry?
No,
like
Lewis,
Larry
it's
Craig?
tapping your foot.
Tapping your foot. Oh, whatever. Yeah, I'm sure he has. Maybe not. We can't say with certitude that he's ruined people's lives, but I think we can guarantee that he hasn't made them any easier.
Google has announced that the first autonomous vehicle it has manufactured, it's the small, short two-seater, which they first unveiled a year ago. It has no steering wheel or brake pedal, is going to begin rolling out on public roads in Northern California. 25 of the cars have been assembled. They're called prototypes for now. They will not exceed 25 miles an hour during this beta test period. And because of state regulations, they will be modified to have brakes and a steering wheel and an accelerator pedal. So eventually, ultimately, those won't be there and the car will be as originally designed. The entire idea here is, of course, to start looking at replacing vehicle fleets with fully autonomous cars. You know, it's incredible. There have been about a dozen accidents with these autonomous vehicles. Most occurred when a human was driving the autonomous vehicles. The ones that didn't occurred because others bumped into the autonomous vehicles, making them at fault. And all were minor incidents, no injuries. Most of these also were, they were so minor that they wouldn't even be reported if it weren't for the fact that there was an autonomous vehicle involved. Sounds like great news, right? Everybody should be excited. No serious accidents, no injuries, almost no damage at all. And these are just beta tests, but corporate media continues to report it in a different way. The AP, for example, self-driving cars can't avoid accidents on California roads. Time. Google blames humans for accidents involving its self-driving cars. Business Insider. Google's self-driving cars have been getting in accidents. Technically accurate in what they say happened, but completely misrepresenting the reality of these are beta cars. And there have been no serious accidents, no injuries, barely any damage.
All minor fender benders at the hands of people. And I guess I understand this type of reporting. You want a headline that is going to make people click on it, that's going to make people read it, that's going to catch someone's attention. And, Google cars, no accidents. People might not click on that.
Not as exciting, right? Oppose the cars because you don't like the idea. Oppose the cars because you don't want to lose the jobs that will ultimately be lost as the technology develops, although I don't think that that's going to be a good argument eventually. But don't baselessly fearmonger. And if you still don't see that this is obviously happening, period, then I don't know what world you're living in. We have a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David and Lewis, viewer here. I just finished watching your interview with Lee Goodman, and I gotta say I completely agree with you guys on everything, but I just have one question that I've been wondering about that wasn't addressed. If guns were to be outlawed in a certain municipality, how would the process of collecting those guns be done? Because,
we weren't talking at all about outlawing guns. Again, the conversation with Lee Goodman was about the Second Amendment. It was not about making guns illegal. It was not about collecting or seizing guns. So that I think you may have misunderstood what that interview was about. On the bonus show today, song intelligence analysis Obama limits police access to military equipment, and bladeless wind turbines. DavidPakman.com/membership. Don't miss the bonus show. People do love it.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.